Gamers who like survival titles have a lot of choices these days. Deadside, Scum, Gray Zone Warfare, Stalker 2, even this new weird demo for Ferocious. I've been bouncing around survival games these days and seeing what hooks me, and I've been genuinely impressed with the variety that is available. Nonetheless, I stumbled across this cute little survival game that's actually doing something a bit different. Let's take a look at SurrounDead. So SurrounDead seems like somewhat of a sleeper title that recently started to attract a lot more players on Steam thanks to a 50% discount and a major update. It's an early access survival game made by a lone developer, which is of course ambitious, but I was immediately impressed by it. It goes for a more cartoony art style which it can pull off without needing to be nitpicked on its visual presentation compared to some of the more visually realistic looking games. And like a lot of open world survival games, SurrounDead is a pretty hardcore experience that doesn't do a lot of hand-holding, and it kind of lets you roam the map with no major restrictions. You of course have the basic stats that you need to manage, like your hunger, thirst, and health. Enemies in this title are a mix of zombies and NPC survivors, with a bunch of subclasses and even opposing factions to add some variety. There's all sorts of zombies, like ones that explode, ones that sprint, toxic zombies, and of course your run-of-the-mill slow-moving walkers, which still certainly provide a threat. You spawn in with a knife, and that's about it. It's hardcore to the point that my first life in the game, I lasted a grand total of 5 minutes. Now, because SurrounDead is currently a single-player game, though with plans for co-op down the road, the developer has included a debug menu that lets you spawn any item or vehicle at will. There's over 500 items with tons of unique and legendary weapons, building items for creating bases, consumables, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And this menu turns the game from a competent but arguably basic survival experience into a sandbox where you can kind of create your own survival adventure and tweak the difficulty and nuanced settings to an experience that you might prefer as a survival gamer. Being able to spawn whatever I wanted or needed in any given moment gave me the freedom to basically create my own survival scenarios. And getting to start out testing base building, which is usually reserved for a higher level of gameplay, gave me ideas and allowed me to have a lot more fun at the start rather than trying to build up for that fun. Sure, you could argue that this is sort of a backwards approach to one of the more hardcore genres of gaming, but I also think this genre in general sometimes tries to chase that brutal realism and ultra hardcore gameplay a little too much, and when a game says, hey, we've got that built into the core foundation, but if you want to just change all the rules to be whatever you like, go for it. And it's kind of opened up the experience and let me play around with the concept to a degree where I go, oh, maybe the survival genre doesn't have to be as focused on this one element as I thought it did. And coming back around to one of my earlier points, there is a lot of variety in the survival genre at the moment, and some of them have mixed things up to make the genre a lot more accessible. But all of the ones that I've tested recently still make you go through the tedious early phase of getting experience when you have nothing. Everything is hard to find, and it seems like a lot of the most fun gameplay takes a lot of effort and many hours to work up towards. And I don't mean to suggest that every survival game should have a debug menu or a difficulty slider, but I do think that SurrounDead may have intentionally or maybe even unintentionally added one of my favorite features to a survival game. It actually reminds me a lot of Arma in a sense. With Arma's scenario editor and mod tools, players can create entire military options or craft survival experiences like DayZ. And that freedom to create and shape your own experience is part of what made Arma such a massive game, and it's also part of why Reforger is blowing up as much as it is. Offering a similar sense of freedom in SurrounDead brings the same benefits. And messing with some of the cheat codes on, eventually I put together the high-powered kit full of legendary weapons and armor, and I started driving around the map to check out some of the more brutal points of interest like the airfield and the prison. The loot there was absolutely nuts with legendary weapons, attachments, and all the survival supplies you could ever want. Working up the gear needed like a gas mask and air filters plus a decent gun and stock ammo might take a long time to get there without using some of the debug menu, but it was nice to see that if you did manage to eventually make it to this area, you would absolutely be rewarded for your effort. And I really like it when survival games give you points of interest that are challenging but actually reward you for the effort. Too many of them have these crazy difficult areas that sometimes reward you for your effort, or sometimes they'll hide the really valuable stuff within those challenge areas, so you might not even find it anyway. Now, of course, I didn't cheat my way through the whole experience. After getting a grip on what to expect and playing around with a lot of the mechanics and figuring out how the game played, I tried to approach it without the dev menu. Scavenging for supplies is what you'll spend most of the early game doing, and it can be a pretty brutal experience outside of the big points of interest or key areas like crashed helicopters and supply drops. Loot is found in containers like cabinets, crates, lockers, trash piles. You'll have the option to quietly search for items to avoid alerting nearby enemies or speeding up the search, while you also risk making more noise and attracting the zombies. You can also mark containers as personal storage, so you can leave excess gear behind to pick it up later, which is kind of a nice feature. There's a huge variety of weapons, most of the stuff you'd expect in any survival game, but it's impressive to see this variety from an indie title, let alone one being developed by a solo developer. You can really build out your kit just about any way you would imagine it, and finding these items around the map gives a huge amount of variety to what you actually might run across. There's also some nice options for getting around the map. Vehicles, again, are not a feature that I would necessarily expect in a solo developer project, but you have them there. Running, of course, is going to be your main mode of transportation early game, but you can also repair vehicles and then drive those around. The vehicles make for great crowd control, as they'll roadkill most enemies aside from the bosses in a single hit. Now, as much as I love supporting indie devs and solo devs and showcasing their hard work and their projects, there's no getting around the aspect that working by yourself on a game just means that you're not going to be able to spend as much time as you want to on every single system. And one of the areas in SurrounDead that feels a bit more lacking compared to the rest of it would be the sound design, or maybe more specifically the game's audio mix. It was hard for me to analyze exactly what was going on, but all of the game's ambient sounds and quieter things like footstep audio are virtually silent. I didn't even notice until I started editing the footage and I boosted the audio, and there was like this whole soundscape of effects that I basically wasn't hearing while I played the game. And I know that sound mixing in a game is actually quite challenging and has a lot of logic behind it. It's something that I've actually experienced on my own firsthand developing my own game, and I feel like the general mix of SurrounDead really needed some attention, since it makes such a big difference, especially in survival games, with just setting the scene and alerting you and making you feel like you're in an environment. Proper use of audio ducking is one of the most important things, in my opinion, when it comes to mixing the sounds at a level that you like, but also making sure that important sounds don't get drowned out by some of the sounds that are less important. Once again, these systems are complicated, they take time, and it's just one more thing to add onto the to-do list for a solo dev. Now, audio issues aside, the big hurdle for SurrounDead is a lack of missions and objectives. Right now, there's one mission in the game for finding a marked safe zone outpost with traders. When you start the game, you don't have a GPS or compass, so navigating requires a bit of roaming around to get your bearings, and this ends up being a decent starter mission that encourages you to learn the map and explore. The problem is it's the only mission in the game right now, so once you complete it, that's pretty much it. You can buy intel from traders, like the locations of secret stashes, but other than that and finding key cards to unlock bunkers and locked points of interest, there's not really a lot pulling you toward new missions or objectives. And in a single player experience, that lack of focus or direction can really stall the gameplay. It sort of feels like if you were playing Stalker but there's just no mission givers, which I guess would be a novel experience for a certain period of time, but I don't think I would have played the game as much as I did if there wasn't a mission system to tie it all together. The good news here is that the developer is focusing on missions for their next update, and multiplayer co-op is also in the game's roadmap, which could be a huge deal for this game. It does at least seem like SurrounDead's developer is on the ball and ahead of the major complaints of the game and sort of aware of what the most needed features are, so that does give me a lot of confidence in this title's future. It is an early access game, and especially with solo dev projects, sometimes that early access means pushing a game out the door a bit bit earlier than you might expect from a larger studio. But the recent surge in people playing the game gives me hope that the developer will have enough incentive and money, especially, to continue development on this game and push it to where I think it could go. I look forward to following the progress on this game. Co-op, missions, and other features seem like they could really push it into another level and become a nice little staple survival game that won't be held back by comparing its visuals to other survival games out there, and maybe keeping the game more open with allowing players to develop and tweak their own scenarios could add a whole new level of variety to survival gaming. Let me know in the comments if you've been playing SurrounDead, and if so, what you like about it. If you enjoyed this coverage of the game, don't forget to drop me a like, subscribe for more content like it, and up next, check out this other survival game that has a bit of a different take on things. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.